Chapter 16. Attention. Dylan ran his fingers down the smooth stock of his crossbow. Sky started to hum in the low-lit kitchen, and once again, his gaze moved from his task at hand to her. The homey scene seemed intimate and comforting. There had never been a woman in this kitchen, or house, for that matter, before Sky. But Dylan found that he liked her here. Not that a woman had to be in the kitchen, he corrected himself, but if she stepped in, he sure wasn't one to kick her out. In fact, Dylan reckoned, Sky would be the one to shoo him out. He wouldn't mind a bit as long as he was able to sit right here and watch her. Dylan realized there were technical terms for every step of the recipe she worked on. She had tried to tell him what they were. But he didn't know a spoon from a spatula. When he was cooking, he just picked whatever tool seemed handy, and he was fine keeping it that way. His eyes trailed the woman as she scraped butter and sugar together. Her whole body moved with the force of the action, almost as if she were dancing. The sharp crack of eggs and a gritty stirring as she beat them into the mixture came next. Dylan's hand ran along his arm as his eyes moved over her. Sky picked up a little spoon and added a few small ingredients with a twist of her wrist. Flour required more effort to mix. Her slight arm muscle, along with the rest of her, swayed with every deep stir of the dough. Lastly, she added chocolate, slipping a few of the chips between her plump lips. Dylan imagined the silky bittersweet morsels melting on her tongue. He'd shared a few with her when they hid the chocolate from Jessie. Sky brought a dough-laden finger to her mouth for a final taste. A little smile curved her lips as she savored its sweetness. After pushing the dough from the spoon to the pan in little clumps, she bent to gently slide the pan into the waiting oven. Hot air escaped the stove, blowing back her hair and warming her face. Sky closed the oven door and stood. She scraped her finger through the dough again. Then raised it to her mouth and turned toward the living room. Dylan's eyes locked with hers and held. Sky's eyes widened before she unknowingly returned Dylan's heavy look. Dylan's world crashed to a halt in a way he had never before experienced. He wasn't sure he drew breath but didn't care. He didn't seem to need air. Just this, whatever this was. Then Sky moved or blinked, he wasn't sure exactly what. The small movement broke their connection. Dylan's heart ached a little at the separation. Dylan brought his hand to his chest and rubbed. He looked at the wood floor and swallowed a few times as he tried to compose himself. It took everything he had to stay rooted to this spot, not to look at her, not to go to her. Dylan knew Sky still stared at him, he could sense it. Nervously, he scuffed his foot. "I gotta get out of here." Dylan kept his head down and mumbled the need to check on Wade. The door smacked behind him as he closed it harder than he intended. Dylan sagged against it. His hand strayed back to his thumping heart. Dylan laid his palm on the middle of his chest, feeling its frantic movement. This new emotion shot to the very core of him. Desire was there, of that there was no doubt, but there was more. Something far deeper stirred in Dylan. Something he had never known before. Dylan thought of how much brighter the house was now Sky was here, of how a helpless gesture from her had him by her side in an instant, of how he put himself in danger to keep her safe. It all led to this. An emotion so raw, he felt vulnerable and exposed. Dylan didn't like it. It frightened him, though he would hardly admit that to himself. "I'm an idiot. Get hurt and have a little womanly attention, and I go all soft inside. Well, that ends today, I ain't allowing no more of it." Dylan pushed off the door and walked into the darkness sure that his strong will would put an end to all this nonsense. But it wasn't the end of it. In the days that followed, Dylan found the sensation stayed with him. It burned a hole in him as sure as a living ember would. Even when he left the cabin, going far into the woods to escape Sky, she lingered in his mind. Dylan would think he had control only to find thoughts of her tumbling through his mind with no warning. Some mornings he unconsciously delayed before escaping outside. Dylan often heard Wade snicker and realized he had been staring at Sky for too long. Angry, Dylan would bang out of the cabin, startling everyone. For some men, love comes easy, an exhilarating experience that makes them want to share it with the world. But not for Dylan. He hated these feelings. He felt frustrated, out of control, a wild mess he no longer recognized and couldn't understand. But as hard as Dylan fought it, more and more often, the cabin drew him to her. It wore at him and, try as he might, there was nothing he could do to stop it.